There is a terrifying truth hidden in Scripture that most people will never hear, and it changes everything you think you understand. Right now, at this very moment, there are people walking the earth who have already crossed a line they cannot return from. They look normal, speak normally, and live ordinary lives. Yet something irreversible has already taken place deep inside them. And the most dangerous part is this: they never realized when it happened, and neither would you if it were you. You were taught that God's mercy is endless, that forgiveness is always available no matter how far someone falls. But what if I told you that there is a point where the door quietly closes, not with noise, but with finality? Not criminals, not monsters, not the worst people you can imagine, but ordinary individuals making seemingly small, repeated choices. Choices that slowly reshape the heart until it no longer responds, no longer listens, no longer even recognizes truth when it stands directly in front of it. Imagine believing you are safe while unknowingly drifting further away with every confident step you take toward your own righteousness. Imagine standing in a place of worship, convinced you are closer to God than everyone else, while actually moving further away than anyone. This is not a story about distant history or abstract theology. This is a mirror held directly in front of your soul. Because the greatest spiritual danger is not rebellion, it is thinking you are already right. And the moment you stop needing mercy is the moment you may have already lost it forever. In the next part, you will see a man who did everything right, followed every rule, and still walked away unforgiven. Picture this scene slowly unfolding inside the temple, where silence carries weight, and every subtle movement feels charged with meaning. The air is thick with reverence, footsteps echo softly across stone, and every person present believes they stand on holy ground. Then a man steps forward, not hesitantly, not uncertainly, but with the calm confidence of someone who believes he already belongs there. His robes are perfectly arranged, his posture upright, and his face carries the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with visible discipline. People recognize him immediately, not by name alone, but by reputation, because he represents what they believe righteousness should look like. He is the kind of man others point to when they speak about devotion, discipline, and unwavering commitment to religious life. But watch carefully, because what happens next is not as innocent as it first appears, and that is where the danger begins. He does not stand in a corner. He does not kneel quietly, and he does not lower himself before God in humility. Instead, he positions himself where he can be seen clearly, where his presence becomes part of the scene itself. Not hidden, not unnoticed, but displayed in a way that ensures his devotion will not go invisible to those around him. Then he lifts his head, raises his voice, and begins to pray in a tone that sounds confident, structured, and deeply religious. At first, everything seems correct. Every word aligns with tradition, and every phrase sounds like something people expect to hear. But listen closely, because what he says reveals a shift that most people would completely miss if they were not paying attention. He thanks God, but not for mercy, not for grace, not for rescue from sin, but for being different from other people. He begins comparing himself, measuring his value against others, elevating his position by lowering those around him in his mind. He speaks about thieves, about immoral people, about those who fail, and he separates himself from them with clear satisfaction. Then he continues, listing his actions, his fasting, his giving, his obedience, turning his prayer into a record of personal achievement. It sounds like gratitude, but it is not gratitude, because gratitude does not need comparison to exist. What you are hearing is something far more dangerous, something that disguises itself so well that even the speaker cannot detect it. This is pride wearing the mask of righteousness, confidence that no longer depends on God, but on personal performance. He is not asking for anything, not seeking transformation, not confessing weakness, because he believes he has already arrived. And that belief quietly replaces his need for mercy, which is the only thing that could have actually saved him. Now shift your focus, not to the center, but to the edges, where another figure stands far from attention and far from recognition. This man does not step forward, he does not lift his voice, and he does not try to be seen by anyone present. His body language alone tells a different story, one of weight, one of awareness, one of something breaking inside him. He cannot even look upward, because the reality of who he is feels too heavy to carry without collapsing under it. His hands strike his chest repeatedly, not as a gesture of performance, but as an expression of genuine inner collapse. Every movement reflects something raw, something unfiltered, something that does not care how it appears to anyone watching. There is no speech prepared, no structure, no attempt to sound impressive, because he knows that none of that would matter anyway. And when he finally speaks, it is not long, not complex, not polished, but it carries more truth than everything spoken before him. He asks for mercy, nothing else, because he understands something the other man has completely missed. He understands that no amount of discipline can replace grace, and no amount of effort can erase the need for it. Now pause and let this moment settle, because what happens next is where everything you believe gets turned upside down. The man who appeared righteousness, the one who seemed closest to God, leaves exactly the same as when he arrived. No change, no forgiveness, no justification, just the same confidence that blinded him in the first place. But the broken man, the one who brought nothing but honesty, leaves completely restored and accepted before God. This is the moment where the illusion collapses, because the difference was never about behavior alone. It was about dependence, about whether someone still needed mercy or believed they had outgrown the need for it. The most dangerous place a person can stand is not in failure, but in the belief that they no longer need saving. The street was already crowded before it happened, people pressing forward, whispering, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. At the center of that growing tension stood a man whose entire life had been defined by silence and darkness. He had never seen a face, never heard a voice, never spoken a single word since the day he was born. His world had always been empty, sealed off from everything that made life feel real or meaningful to others. But on that day, everything changed in a single moment that no one present would ever be able to forget. Jesus stepped toward him, not with hesitation, not with ritual, but with authority that required no explanation. There was no long process, no visible effort, no gradual transformation that people could slowly rationalize away. One moment the man stood trapped in complete isolation, and the next moment everything opened at once. His eyes focused, his body reacted, his voice broke through years of silence into the noise of the crowd. People stepped back instinctively, not out of fear alone, but because they knew they were witnessing something impossible. The man looked around in shock, taking in light, movement, faces, and sound for the very first time in his life. His first expressions were not words, but raw reactions, confusion, amazement, and overwhelming awareness colliding at once. The crowd erupted immediately, voices rising, questions spreading, hope igniting in a way that had not been felt for generations. Some shouted, some cried, some stood frozen, but everyone understood that this moment could not be ignored or dismissed. This could be the one, someone said, and the word spread quickly, carrying both excitement and fear through the crowd. Because if this was true, then everything they believed about power, authority, and control was about to change. Standing just behind the crowd were the religious leaders, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. They saw the man before, and they saw him now, and they understood exactly what had just taken place. They knew the scriptures, they knew the signs, and they knew what this kind of power was supposed to mean. This was not confusion, not uncertainty, not something they needed time to interpret or analyze. They recognized it instantly, and that is what makes what they did next so deeply disturbing. Instead of stepping forward, instead of acknowledging what was undeniable, they began to calculate their response. Because accepting this moment would mean losing control, losing influence, and admitting they had been wrong all along. So they chose something else, something deliberate, something that would protect their position at any cost. They looked at the man who had just been restored, at the evidence standing alive before them, and they spoke. "This power is not from God," they said. And the words cut through the noise like something cold and unnatural. "He drives out darkness by the power of darkness," they continued, turning truth into something twisted beyond recognition. The crowd fell silent for a moment, not because the statement made sense, but because of who had spoken it. Authority carries weight, even when it distorts reality, and that is how deception begins to spread. But Jesus did not remain silent, and when he responded, it was not confusion that filled the air, but clarity. "A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand," he said, exposing the flaw in their argument with undeniable logic. "If darkness fights itself, it collapses. If evil destroys itself, it cannot survive." And everyone listening understood that instantly. Their accusation was not just wrong, it was impossible, and yet they had chosen it anyway. Then the moment shifted, because this was no longer just about logic, but about something far more serious. Jesus looked directly at them, not as observers, but as people standing on the edge of a line they did not recognize. And he spoke words that would echo far beyond that street, far beyond that moment, into every generation that followed. Every sin can be forgiven, every failure restored, every rebellion redeemed, but there is a line you must never cross. Because when you see the truth clearly, understand it fully, and still choose to call it evil, something inside you changes. Not suddenly, not visibly, but permanently, like a door closing quietly that will never open again. That day, they did not just reject a miracle, they redefined it, twisted it, and protected their pride over truth itself. And that is how someone can stand directly in front of light and still choose darkness without even realizing what they have done. The city of Corinth was loud, wealthy, and morally chaotic, a place where almost anything could be justified if it felt right. Trade ships filled the harbor, money flowed constantly, and with it came a culture that slowly erased the line between right and wrong. But what happened next did not take place in the streets, not in hidden corners, but inside a gathering of believers. Inside a place where people claimed to follow truth, something was happening that even the surrounding culture found disturbing. News began to spread quietly at first, carried through conversations, whispers, and uneasy expressions among those who had seen it. It was not a rumor without substance, not an exaggeration, but a reality that could be observed openly, without denial. A man in the church was living in a relationship that crossed a line so obvious that even outsiders would not accept it. This was not a hidden failure, not a private struggle, but a visible, ongoing situation that everyone knew about. And yet, what shocked observers was not only the act itself, but the reaction of the people around him. No confrontation, no correction, no grief, only silence that slowly turned into acceptance over time. Week after week, the man walked into the gathering without hesitation, without shame, without any sign that something was wrong. He sat among others, participated fully, and was treated as if nothing in his life required change or reflection. But the deeper issue was not the man alone. It was the community that chose not to respond to what was happening. They began to redefine tolerance as love and acceptance as compassion, blurring the line between care and compromise. Instead of recognizing the danger, they congratulated themselves for being open, for being inclusive, for refusing to judge any. They believed they were demonstrating maturity, when in reality they were slowly losing the ability to recognize truth. Then the message reached Paul, and when he heard what was happening, his reaction was immediate and unmistakably serious. He did not respond casually, he did not soften his words, and he did not treat the situation as something minor. Because he understood something they did not, that unchecked behavior does not remain isolated, it spreads and reshapes everything around. Like a small amount of yeast working through an entire batch, it transforms the whole environment without anyone noticing at first. Paul saw clearly that this was no longer about one individual choice, but about the direction of an entire community. If they continued like this, they would normalize what should have shocked them and celebrate what should have broken their heart. So he wrote with urgency, calling them to act, not out of harshness, but out of clarity about what was truly at stake. He told them to remove the man from among them, not to destroy him, but to force him to confront the reality he was ignoring. Because sometimes the most loving action is not silent acceptance, but refusing to support what is leading someone toward destruction. And this is where the tension becomes uncomfortable, because it challenges the way most people define love today. Love is not pretending everything is fine when it is not, and it is not supporting choices that slowly separate someone from truth. Real love recognizes danger, speaks honestly, and refuses to allow self-destruction to continue. Then Paul goes further, beyond one situation, into a warning that reaches directly into the life of every. He lists behaviors that, when practiced without change, reveal a pattern that leads away from everything people claim to believe. Not occasional failure, not moments of weakness, but a lifestyle that refuses to turn back, refuses to change direction. Because transformation is not just belief, it is evidence, it is movement. It is a shift that cannot remain invisible. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The danger is not in struggling, but in settling, not in falling, but in staying down willing. The church in Corinth believed they were strong, but in reality they had become blind to what was happening right in front of them. And that is how something destructive can grow quietly, not through rebellion, but through silence that slowly becomes approval. Paul did not stop with one example, because he understood that the real issue was far deeper than a single situation. He knew that patterns shape identity, and identity determines direction, whether someone moves toward truth or away from it. So he begins listing behaviors, not as random rules, but as indicators of a life that has chosen a specific path. And the unsettling part is this: many of these behaviors do not look shocking at first glance to most people. They are common, normalized, often justified, and in many cases even encouraged by the culture surrounding us today, which is exactly why they are dangerous. Because what feels normal is rarely questioned, and what is not questioned slowly takes control. He speaks about immorality, not as a vague concept, but as a pattern of choices that prioritize desire over truth repeatedly. Not a single failure, not a moment of weakness, but a direction where desire becomes the guiding force of decision-making. He speaks about idolatry, not only statues or rituals, but anything that replaces what should be central in a person's life. Money, success, recognition, control. Anything that becomes more important than truth slowly reshapes how someone thinks and acts. Then he mentions greed, a quiet force that rarely feels wrong because it disguises itself as ambition and progress. But when accumulation becomes the goal, people begin measuring life by gain rather than meaning. And that shift changes everything. He speaks about dishonesty, not only obvious deception, but small compromises that slowly become part of everyday behavior. The kind of lies people justify to avoid consequences, to protect image, or to gain advantage without immediate cost. At first, these things feel small, manageable, even harmless, because nothing dramatic seems to happen right away. But patterns do not reveal their outcome immediately. They build quietly, shaping the heart long before the result becomes visible. And this is where most people misunderstand the warning, because they focus on individual actions instead of consistent direction. It is not about whether someone has ever failed, it is about whether they have chosen to remain where they are. Because remaining eventually becomes identity, and identity eventually becomes something that no longer feels wrong to the person living it. And once something stops feeling wrong, it becomes almost impossible to recognize the need to change at all. Paul's message is not about perfection, it is about transformation, about movement, about evidence that something inside has shifted. He reminds them that many of them used to live in those patterns, but something changed, something broke that cycle completely. They were not defined by who they had been, but by what they had become after encountering truth in a real way. And that is the difference, not the absence of past failure, but the presence of present transformation that cannot be ignored. But here is the danger. Some people want the promise without the process, the outcome without the change that leads to it. They want to believe they are safe while continuing to move in a direction that leads somewhere completely different. And that is where self-deception becomes strongest, because it allows someone to feel secure while heading toward the wrong destination. The question is not whether someone makes mistakes, but whether they are willing to turn, to change, to move in another direction. Because a life that refuses to turn will eventually arrive exactly where it has been heading all along. The pressure did not arrive all at once. It built slowly, tightening around them until every decision began to carry a cost. These were not outsiders, not casual observers, but people who had already stepped into belief and experienced something real. They had stood in gatherings where truth was not just spoken, but felt, where something inside them had shifted unmistakably. They were not guessing anymore, not searching blindly, because they had already seen enough to know what was true. But life around them began to change, and the cost of holding on became heavier with every passing day. Friends distanced themselves, families questioned them, opportunities disappeared, and what once felt certain now felt expensive. The world they came from started calling them back, not with threats alone, but with comfort, familiarity, and relief. A life without pressure, without resistance, without the weight of standing apart from everything they once belonged to. At first, the thoughts were small, almost harmless, just questions that seemed reasonable under the circumstances they faced. What if they stepped back just a little? What if they adjusted? What if they could find a way to keep both sides? They did not decide to walk away in a single moment. They moved slowly, one compromise at a time, barely noticing the shift. Each step felt justified, each adjustment felt necessary, and each choice seemed small enough not to matter in the long run. But direction is not defined by intention. It is defined by movement, and movement always leads somewhere specific. And without realizing it, they began moving away from the very thing they once believed had changed everything. The writer of Hebrews does not describe them as confused. because confusion can still be corrected when someone seeks clarity. He describes them as people who had already understood, already experienced, already received more than most ever will. They had seen truth clearly, not as information, but as reality, something that had once reshaped how they saw everything. They had tasted what it meant to be restored, to feel weight lifted, to know that something inside had been made new. They had participated in something beyond themselves, moments where the unseen became visible through undeniable experiences. Not imagination, not emotion alone, but something that left a mark that could not easily be dismissed or forgotten. And yet, despite all of that, they began to turn back, not because they did not know, but because they chose something else. Comfort over conviction, safety over truth, familiarity over transformation, choosing what felt easier instead of what was right. This is where the warning becomes almost impossible to ignore, because it speaks about a line that forms after repeated choices, a point where returning is no longer simply difficult, but something inside no longer even desires to return at all. Not because the door is locked from the outside, but because the person has lost the ability to recognize why they should walk back. Their perspective shifts so completely that what once felt true now feels unnecessary, and what once mattered now feels distant. The most unsettling part is that this process does not feel dramatic while it is happening. It feels gradual and almost invisible, which means someone can be far away before they ever realize how far they have actually moved. This is not about people who struggle, not about those who fall and seek to stand again despite their weakness. This is about those who stop turning back, who stop responding, who slowly choose a different direction entirely. And once that direction becomes fixed, it does not lead back to where they started, no matter how much time passes. Because some paths do not just move forward, they quietly remove the desire to ever return again. The sun had barely touched the horizon when Esau left the camp, moving with the quiet confidence of a man who had never known failure in the wilderness. He understood the terrain, the rhythm of animals, the shifting winds, and the instincts that had shaped him into a hunter others admired and respected. Hunting was not simply survival for him, but a reflection of who he was, a visible proof of strength, competence, and the position he carried as the firstborn son. That position meant more than land or wealth, because it carried a promise, a legacy, and a future that extended far beyond his present understanding. Yet that morning, his thoughts were not focused on inheritance nor on destiny, but on something far more immediate and tangible. He was thinking about the hunt, about success, about returning with proof that he remained who he believed himself to be. As the hours passed, something subtle began to shift, something that did not announce itself loudly, but slowly disrupted the pattern he expected. The usual signs were missing. No tracks pressed into the soil, no distant movement, no indication that success was waiting just ahead. He continued forward anyway, driven by habit and confidence, believing that persistence would eventually produce the result he had always achieved before. But as daylight stretched into evening and evening into exhaustion, the absence of success became impossible to ignore any longer. By the end of the first day, he had nothing, and the certainty that once carried him forward began to weaken beneath the weight of reality. Still, turning back without anything felt like failure, and failure was something he had never learned how to accept. So he pressed deeper into the wilderness, convinced that one more attempt, one more stretch of land, would change everything. But the second day brought no reward, only increasing fatigue, fading strength, and the beginning of something far more dangerous. His supplies were gone, his body was weakening, and his thoughts were no longer as clear as they had been before. Hunger began to grow, not as a simple discomfort, but as a force that slowly took control over his reasoning and judgment. By the third day, that hunger had become overwhelming, consuming his focus until everything else began to lose importance. His movements slowed, his vision blurred slightly, and his thoughts narrowed into a single urgent need that could not be ignored. Survival replaced purpose, and the man who once hunted with precision now moved with desperation and declining strength. Finally, he turned back toward the camp, not because he chose to, but because he had reached the limit of what his body could endure. Each step toward home required effort, each moment stretched under the pressure of exhaustion, and his thoughts were no longer steady or balanced. Then, before he even saw the camp itself, something reached him first, something that immediately changed everything inside him. The smell of food. It moved through the air with intensity, rich and unmistakable, triggering a reaction that bypassed logic and went straight to instinct. His body responded instantly, His focus collapsed, and everything else that once mattered faded into the background without resistance. When he entered the camp, he saw Jacob sitting calmly, stirring a pot with no urgency, no tension, and no sign of struggle. The contrast between them could not have been more striking, one controlled and steady, the other barely holding himself together. Esau approached quickly, not greeting him, not pausing, not thinking beyond the immediate need that now dominated his entire awareness. His voice carried urgency as he asked for food, not as a casual request, but as a demand shaped by desperation. Jacob looked at him carefully, recognizing the moment, understanding that this was not just about hunger, but about something deeper. Instead of immediately giving him what he asked for, he made an offer that sounded almost unreasonable under normal conditions. "Sell me your birthright." For a brief moment, the meaning of those words hovered in the air, but Esau was no longer in a state where he could fully process their weight. The inheritance, the promise, the future, all of it stood against the overwhelming pressure of his immediate physical need. Under normal circumstances, the idea would have been unthinkable, something no rational person would ever agree to. But this was no longer a normal situation, because his judgment had already been overtaken by the intensity of his condition. "I am about to die," he said, speaking from a place of exaggerated desperation that felt completely real to him at that moment. "What good is the birthright to me now?" That question revealed everything, because in that moment, he was not just choosing food over hunger, but choosing the present over the eternal. He was measuring value based on immediate relief rather than lasting significance, and that shift determined his decision. Jacob required an oath, turning a temporary exchange into a permanent one, binding the moment into something that could not be reversed later. And Esau agreed without hesitation, sealing the decision that would follow him long after the hunger had disappeared. He ate quickly, drank deeply, and as strength returned to his body, the urgency that had driven his choice began to fade away. Within a short time, the pain was gone, the desperation had passed, and everything felt normal again. Then he stood up and walked away. No reflection, no reconsideration, no awareness of what had just taken place, only satisfaction that his immediate need had been met. But the decision remained, fixed, irreversible, and far more significant than he had allowed himself to understand. He did not lose his birthright by accident, nor did he misunderstand what it represented, nor was it taken from him by force. He chose to give it away, because in that moment he considered it less valuable than the relief standing directly in front of him. And that is what makes this story so unsettling, because it is not about hunger alone, but about how value is revealed under pressure. What someone chooses in a moment of desperation exposes what truly matters to them far more clearly than anything they claim to believe. Esau's story does not end in the wilderness, because the same decision is being made every single day in ways people rarely recognize. Not with bowls of stew, not in tents, and not in deserts, but in ordinary moments that feel far less dramatic and far more acceptable. The pattern is the same, even if the setting has changed, because the human heart has not evolved beyond that moment of exchange. Something eternal is still being weighed against something temporary, and the temporary keeps winning more often than anyone admits. It does not look like a single dramatic decision, but a series of small choices that slowly shape direction over time. A compromise here, a justification there, a quiet shift that seems harmless until it becomes the new normal without resistance. People tell themselves that it is not that serious, that they can adjust later, that nothing permanent is being decided in the moment. But direction is always being set, even when it feels like nothing significant is happening at all. A person chooses comfort over conviction, avoiding discomfort because standing firm would cost something they are not ready to lose. Another chooses approval over truth, adjusting what they believe in order to remain accepted by those around them. Some choose distraction over reflection, filling their time so completely that they never have to face what is actually happening inside them. Others choose success over meaning, building a life that looks impressive while something essential quietly disappears beneath the surface. Each decision feels small, isolated, and reversible, but together they form a pattern that becomes harder to break with time. And just like Esau, the focus remains fixed on what is immediate, what is visible, what brings relief right now. Very few people wake up and decide to walk away from something eternal in a single, clear, irreversible moment. Instead, they move gradually, step by step, until the distance becomes so great that returning no longer feels natural or necessary. The most dangerous part is that nothing seems wrong at first, because the consequences do not appear immediately after the choice. The moment passes, the need is satisfied, and life continues as if nothing important has been exchanged at all. But something has shifted, something subtle but real, something that begins to reshape how a person sees value and meaning. What once felt important becomes optional, what once felt essential becomes negotiable, and what once felt sacred becomes distant. This is how the trade happens, not through obvious rejection, but through quiet reordering of priorities that no one else can easily see. And over time, that reordering becomes identity, shaping decisions so consistently that it no longer feels like a choice anymore. Esau did not regret his decision immediately because the hunger was gone, and the relief felt worth the cost at that moment. But later, when the consequences surfaced, he realized that what he had given away could not be taken back or restored. And that is the part most people underestimate, because some decisions do not come with immediate feedback or visible warning signs. They reveal their weight only later, when the opportunity to choose differently no longer exists in the same way. The question is not whether people are making this trade, but whether they recognize it while it is still happening. Because once something eternal has been treated as temporary long enough, it eventually becomes something a person no longer values at all. John did not describe it as a theory, nor as a metaphor meant to comfort, but as a vision so clear, it left no room for misunderstanding. He saw a city descending, not built by human hands, but formed with a perfection that no earthly structure could ever replicate. Its presence was overwhelming, radiant, and alive with a kind of purity that made everything else seem incomplete by comparison. Walls stood firm, foundations were unshakable, and everything about it reflected something beyond human design or imagination. Light filled the city completely, not from the sun, not from the moon, but from a source that did not depend on anything external. There was no darkness, no hidden corners, no shadows where anything could be concealed or distorted from what it truly was. Every detail pointed to one reality. This was a place where nothing false, nothing broken, and nothing corrupted could exist. Not because of restriction alone, but because everything inside it was aligned with truth at a level that could not be compromised. The gates stood open, not as an invitation to everyone, but as a reflection that those who belonged there were already prepared. No one forced their way in, no one negotiated entry, and no one arrived untransformed into that environment. Then the contrast appeared, not gradually, but sharply, dividing everything into two outcomes that could not overlap or merge. Because outside that city was something entirely different, not neutral, not undefined, but clearly separated from everything within. And the description was not limited to extreme figures or obvious examples that people easily distance themselves from. It included patterns, identities, and ways of living that many people justify, defend, and continue without hesitation. Cowardice was named, not fear alone, but the choice to abandon truth when pressure made standing firm uncomfortable or costly. Unbelief was named, not ignorance, but the refusal to accept what had been clearly revealed and understood. Deception was included, not only grand manipulation, but every form of dishonesty that shapes how someone lives and interacts daily. Because truth is not partial in that place, and anything built on distortion cannot exist within it at all. This is where most people become uneasy, because the list does not allow distance or easy separation from the description. It reaches into ordinary behavior, into common patterns, into areas people often excuse or minimize without reflection. And that is what makes the separation so absolute, because it is not based on comparison with others, but alignment with truth itself. Not who is better, not who appears more disciplined, but who has actually been transformed at the deepest level. Nothing unclean enters, not even the smallest trace, not even the most hidden part that someone believes can remain unnoticed. Because the standard is not adjusted to fit human behavior, but remains fixed regardless of how people choose to live. This is not a system that can be negotiated, not a standard that can be gradually approached without change, and not a place where identity can be hidden. Everything is revealed exactly as it is, and everything is placed exactly where it belongs based on that reality. The final separation is not sudden in the sense of being unexpected, because it reflects the direction that has already been chosen. It is the conclusion of a path, the confirmation of a pattern, the visible result of decisions that were made long before that moment arrived. And this is where the weight of everything becomes clear, because nothing can be adjusted at that point, nothing can be reversed. What has been formed internally is revealed externally, and the result matches the direction that has been lived consistently. The city represents what is pure, what is restored, what is aligned completely with truth without compromise or distortion. Everything outside represents what has remained unchanged, what has resisted transformation, what has chosen a different direction entirely. There is no middle space, no overlap, no gradual transition between the two, only a clear and permanent distinction. And that is why the most important decisions are not made in that moment, but long before it ever arrives. After everything that has been revealed, after every warning, every story, and every line that has been crossed, one reality still remains. The door is still open. Not because time is unlimited, not because choices do not matter, but because the invitation has not yet been withdrawn. And that is what makes this moment more serious than anything that has come before it. Because everything you have heard is not simply information, it is a mirror placed directly in front of your life. Not to accuse, not to condemn immediately, but to reveal direction, to expose what is already forming beneath the surface. The invitation is not complicated, not hidden, and not reserved for those who believe they have earned it. It is given freely, without cost, without requirement of perfection, and without demand for a flawless past. But it does require something that many people avoid, something that cannot exist alongside pride or self-sufficiency. It requires recognition, the willingness to admit that something is not right and cannot be fixed alone. This is where everything separates again, not between people who fail and people who succeed, but between those who respond and those who resist. Because the difference has never been perfection, it has always been whether someone is willing to turn when they see the truth. The ones who turn do not do so because they are stronger, but because they refuse to pretend that everything is already fine. They recognize the need for mercy, and that recognition becomes the beginning of something that changes everything that follows. But there are others who hear the same truth and respond differently, not with rejection at first, but with delay. They tell themselves there will be another moment, another opportunity, another time when it will be easier to respond. They assume that awareness can be postponed without consequence, that recognition can be ignored without changing direction. But what they do not see is that delay itself is a decision, and repeated delay slowly becomes a fixed position. The longer someone waits, the easier it becomes to continue waiting, until eventually the urgency disappears completely. And when urgency disappears, response often disappears with it, leaving only a quiet distance that feels normal over time. This is how the door closes, not with a loud sound, not with a visible event, but with a gradual loss of response inside. The invitation remains the same, but the person no longer feels the need to accept it at all. And that is why this moment matters, because it is not about fear, but about clarity, about seeing what is real, while there is still time to respond. The decision is not forced, not manipulated, and not taken away, but it will not remain available forever. There will be a moment when everything becomes final, when what has been chosen internally becomes fully visible and unchangeable. Not because grace failed, but because it was no longer received when it was offered. So the question is not whether the invitation exists, because it does, and it is still being extended right now. The question is whether you recognize it while it is still open, while the ability to respond still remains within you. Because once that ability fades, once that awareness disappears, the door does not need to be locked from the outside. It has already been closed from within. And everything you have heard leads to this single point, not to overwhelm you, but to make one thing absolutely clear. Today is the moment where direction can still change. Not tomorrow, not later, not when it feels easier, but now, while the choice is still yours to make.